My name is Robert Miller. I'm 47 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've been the head of client relations at Brancor Biotech. The rain was coming down hard that afternoon in Chicago when the new director, Jessica Evans, spoke those words in front of my entire team. I just nodded, keeping my hands steady on the mahogany conference table. The air conditioning was blasting, as it always did on that floor, and a chill ran up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I hope the client presentation goes well on Friday, I said, my voice even. A dense silence fell over the room. My team, people I'd hired, trained and watched grow from junior associates to department heads, stared at the table as if some secret only they could see was written on its surface. Jessica's eyes narrowed. She was 32, with an MBA from one of those Ivy League schools, perfectly straight hair, and a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. Hired just 3 months ago to modernize operations. She'd never worked a single day in biotechnology before this. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, tapping her imported pen on the table, marking the beat of a song only she could hear. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. A smile I had worn through countless difficult negotiations over the years. "You'll find out," I replied simply. I walked to my office at the end of the hall, the one with the view of Lincoln Park, and started packing my things. 23 years of work fitting into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos from successful product launches, framed certificates, the thank you card from the USDA when we saved that drought-resistant seed project, the coffee mug my daughter, Caroline, gave me that said, "World's Best Dad," with permanent coffee stains that told the story of years waking up at 5 a.m. to prepare reports before the day's chaos began. Jessica followed me, hovering in the doorway like a vulture circling a carcass. She wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the doorframe. "Robert, about the Vitalis Systems account," she began, her voice less confident than it had been minutes earlier. "Not my problem anymore," I said, sealing the first box with packing tape. The sound of the tape unspooling created a barrier between us, a line she wouldn't dare cross. She left me alone after that. My team came by one. They didn't say much, just silent handshakes and promises to keep in touch that we both knew time and circumstance would dissolve like sugar in coffee. Michael, who started as an intern and now managed the Southern accounts, left a folded note on my desk without a word. Victor, our regulatory specialist, a guy from Louisiana who knew FDA regulations like the back of his hand, just shook his head in disapproval. Beatrice, my senior analyst, lingered the longest. Graying hair framed a face that had seen the company grow from a rented office to a skyscraper of glass and steel. "This is wrong, Robert," she whispered, adjusting her glasses as she always did when she was nervous. Her hands, with prominent blue veins from typing thousands of reports, trembled slightly. "It's just business," I told her, closing the second box. But we both knew it wasn't. The truth is, I had seen this coming for weeks. The storm had been brewing ever since Jessica arrived, with her colorful charts and buzzwords that seemed to impress the founder's son. She had been undermining me in small ways, scheduling meetings without me, questioning my decisions in front of clients as if pointing out a typo during a major presentation. Last week, she suggested to upper management that my old-fashioned approach was holding the company back. My approach, which had kept Brancor afloat through 3 recessions. What she didn't know was that I had been keeping detailed records of every slight, every attempt to exclude me. I was also preparing for the worst-case scenario. Because when you spend 15 years managing multi-million-dollar accounts in a country where personal relationships are hard currency, you learn to plan for everything. I loaded my boxes into my Chevy Silverado, a veteran of many battles. Henderson, the security guard who'd worked there since before the company was founded, held the door for me, his eyes downcast as if ashamed of what he was witnessing. "Gonna be back soon, right, Mr. Miller?" he asked, his southern accent still intact after 3 decades in Chicago. "Things change, Henderson," I replied, squeezing his shoulder. "But people stay the same." I drove home through the chaotic traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. Fat drops of rain hammered the windshield, blurring the headlights of the cars ahead. The radio was reporting another political scandal, another corruption case that would soon be forgotten. I switched to a classic rock station and let James Taylor keep me company in the gridlock, that turned the commute home into a journey of forced self-reflection. My wife, Helen, was waiting with freshly brewed coffee and the kind of look that said she already knew what had happened before I even opened my mouth. 22 years together had created a kind of telepathy between us. She was on the balcony of our Wicker Park apartment, surrounded by her ferns and orchids that seemed to thrive under her meticulous care, unlike the plants I tried to keep alive at the office. "How bad?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, hers with 2 spoonfuls of sugar, mine with none. "A ritual of years. Could be worse," I answered, watching the street life below. Young people heading to bars, people coming home from work, the pizza delivery guy on his noisy scooter, life carrying on, indifferent to the small earthquake that had just struck my professional world. But sitting there in my kitchen, looking at those boxes that summarized 2 decades of dedication, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness, but something sharper. Something I recognized as the same drive that made me leave a small town in rural Illinois to try my luck in the city. Jessica had made a mistake, a huge mistake, and she wouldn't realize it until Friday morning, when Vitalis Systems called asking where their presentation was. The presentation that only I knew how to deliver. I started at Brancore straight out of the University of Michigan, where I graduated with a degree in biochemistry. Back then, it was a small company with big dreams and even bigger problems, occupying 2 floors of a commercial building in River North. The founder, old Edward Brandt, a quiet man from Ohio with a sharp gaze, took a chance on a kid from the countryside with no experience, but a lot of drive and an award-winning thesis on recombinant proteins. "You've got a fire in your eyes, son," he said when he hired me, "and they don't teach that at Harvard." I spent my first 5 years learning everything: lab procedures, regulatory compliance, client psychology, the idiosyncrasies of American bureaucracy. I learned to navigate the labyrinth of FDA approvals and how to explain complex biotech processes to investors who barely knew the difference between a bacterium and a virus. By 30, I was running the client relations department. By 35, I was the guy companies called when they needed biotech solutions done fast and done right. The problem solver. I built relationships that kept Brancore afloat during the 2008 crisis, when bigger, more established competitors were closing their doors or selling off operations to multinationals. When competitors went under, we thrived because our clients didn't trust a company called Brancore Biotech. They trusted Robert Miller. Helen understood the demands, the late-night calls from overseas clients, the weekend trips to secure new contracts in Dallas, Atlanta, or Seattle. She practically raised our daughter Caroline by herself while I was building something that mattered, something that supported our family and employed 63 people who depended on me to pay their mortgages, private school tuitions and medical bills. But things started to change when Edward Brandt retired 2 years ago. After a heart scare, his doctor called a final warning. His son, Mark, took over as CEO and brought in management consultants who talked about disruption and agile mindset and saw employees as line items on an Excel spreadsheet, people with expensive MBAs and no practical experience in our field. Jessica was one of those consultants who somehow convinced Mark she could optimize her client engagement strategy, as if relationships built over decades could be optimized by someone who didn't know the difference between a monoclonal antibody and an aspirin. The warning signs were there from day one. She would show up to client meetings unprepared and interrupt my presentations to suggest meaningless changes. Once, during a meeting with the State Department of Health, she questioned our testing methodology in front of the secretary, nearly costing us a $3 million contract. She reorganized my filing system without asking, misplacing crucial documents. She implemented a new expensive CRM that nobody knew how to use properly. Worst of all, she started scheduling calls with my biggest clients, claiming she needed to assess their satisfaction levels, as if you could measure in metrics and graphs what I had spent years building through dinner conversations, fulfilled promises, and problems solved at 3 in the morning. 3 weeks ago, I came into the office early, before even the receptionist arrived, when only Henderson and the cleaning crew were moving through the silent hallways. I heard Jessica's voice coming from the conference room, on the phone with someone from corporate. The door was slightly ajar, and her words hit me like ice water. Robert's methods are outdated, she was saying, her voice echoing in the empty space. The clients respect him out of inertia, but they need new thinking. I can deliver the same results with half the operational costs. And we have to be realistic. He's almost 50. He's not going to keep up with the changes in the industry. Half the costs meant cutting my team. People like Beatrice, who had worked nights to master the specs for the Vitalis account, even while caring for her mother with Alzheimer's, or Thomas, who learned Mandarin just to better communicate with our partners in Shanghai, studying after hours for 6 months. Victor, who knew every comma in federal health regulations and had contacts at every level of the FDA. I should have confronted her right then, walked into that room and shown her I understood her game perfectly. Instead, I did what I always did when faced with a challenge. I focused on the work, on the tangible, on what I could control. The Vitalis presentation was our biggest proposal of the year, a $5 million contract for specialized biosensors to be used in tropical disease research, with the potential for international expansion. I had been preparing for 8 months, building relationships with their technical team, understanding their exact requirements, having lunch with their CFO to grasp their cash flow concerns. Jessica knew about the meeting, of course. It was marked in red on the corporate calendar, impossible to miss. But she didn't know the details, the nuances, the behind-the-scenes work. In her mind, presentations were PowerPoint slides, pretty graphs, and motivational buzzwords. She didn't understand that the CTO of Vitalis, Dr. Roger Campbell, hated formal presentations. He preferred direct technical discussions with numbers and facts, no fluff. She didn't know that the purchasing director, Dr. Sandra Mendez, an Argentinian-American who had been in the States for 20 years, only trusted suppliers who could speak her technical language without oversimplifying. She didn't comprehend that the CEO, Edward Vitalis, the company's founder, and a retired professor from the University of Chicago, made decisions based on implementation timelines and scientific impact, not on cost savings or market trends. The irony was perfect, almost poetic. Jessica had fired me to appear decisive and visionary to Mark, but on Friday morning, when Vitalis called asking specifically for Robert Miller, she would learn the difference between managing people and managing relationships. On Thursday night, I couldn't sleep, not from worry but from anticipation, the same kind of nervous energy I felt before defending my thesis in college. Helen found me in the kitchen at 2 a.m., sitting with a strong cup of coffee and my laptop open. The bluish glow of the screen lit the dark room like a nocturnal aquarium. "You're planning something," she said. It wasn't a question, just thinking, I replied, closing a few browser windows. She sat across from me, wearing the faded blue robe she refused to replace. 22 years of marriage had taught her when to push and when to wait. This was a waiting moment. Her fingers, still with traces of paint from the art classes she taught for kids in an after-school program, tapped lightly on the table. "Jessica called earlier," she finally said, sipping her now lukewarm coffee. "Left 3 voicemails. What did she want?" Helen poured herself some coffee, adding sugar with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much was needed to make it palatable. "Details on the Vitalis presentation." She sounded desperate. Helen smiled, a faint smile that formed little wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. She had been there for all the late nights, all the weekends I spent building these client relationships. She saw me miss birthdays, graduations, and Caroline's piano recitals because a client in Seattle had an emergency or because a batch of reagents was stuck in customs. She understood what I had built better than anyone. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. I'm not her employee anymore." That's when I realized it, the full scope of what Jessica had done. She hadn't just fired me. She had vaporized 15 years of institutional knowledge, client preferences, technical specifications, and relationship dynamics that had taken years to develop. The Vitalis account wasn't just about a slick presentation. It was about trust built through dozens of smaller interactions, like remembering that Dr. Campbell preferred technical drawings to colorful flowcharts, or knowing that Dr. Mendez needed comparative data with international competitors, or understanding that Edward Vitalis made decisions based on implementation timelines, not cost savings. Jessica thought she could wing it, show up with a standard presentation deck full of corporate jargon, and charm her way through a $5 million deal. She had no idea that the Vitalis team would be expecting the deep technical breakdown I had promised them over months of preparatory talks. The one that existed only in my head and in handwritten notes in notebooks that were never digitized. Not out of sloppiness, but because that's how I worked best, processing information the old-fashioned way, with pen and paper. I opened my laptop and looked at my digital calendar. Vitalis was scheduled for 10 a.m. Friday. Around 11 a.m., I calculated. Jessica would be sitting in Mark's office, trying to explain why their biggest potential client of the year walked out after 20 minutes of a disastrous presentation. My phone buzzed on the wooden table we brought from Helen's parents' house in Vermont. A text from Beatrice. Jessica has been in your office all day looking for files. She seems to be panicking. Asked where you keep the Vitalis technical specs. I replied, the files are on the server. She has access to everything, which was technically true. She had access to contracts, basic client info, standard presentation templates, raw data that any new employee could access. What she didn't have was the context, the stories behind the numbers, the human element that turned data into relationships, the countless informal conversations with Edward Vitalis about the future of biotech research in America, Dr. Mendez's concerns about previous suppliers who failed to deliver on time, Dr. Campbell's specific technical demands that were never formally documented because they came up during a company barbecue. I poured another cup of coffee, the strong aroma filling the kitchen and taking me back to countless similar mornings over the years, preparing for corporate battles that seemed so important at the time. Do you think I'm being petty? I asked Helen. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look she reserved for evaluating a piece of art. I think you're getting exactly what you asked for, she finally replied. Nothing more, nothing less. I opened a new document on my laptop. I started typing my formal resignation letter, the one I should have sent months ago when I first realized what Jessica was doing. Polite words, appropriate thanks, mentions of new challenges and personal growth, the sterile vocabulary of professional transitions. But then I stopped, selected all the text and hit delete. Why make it easy for her? Instead, I opened my personal email and started contacting people at other biotech firms, people who had been trying to recruit me for years with offers I had always refused out of loyalty to Brancor. By morning, I had 3 interview requests and 1 preliminary job offer. Helen woke up at 6 a.m. and found me still at the kitchen table, already dressed for the day. The light blue shirt, she said, matched my eyes, perfectly ironed. Going somewhere? She asked, preparing her breakfast, whole wheat toast with avocado and tomato, a daily ritual for over a decade. A coffee shop downtown. Good Wi-Fi. Quiet place to make some calls. She kissed my forehead, leaving a faint scent of face cream in the air. Knock 'em dead. I wasn't planning on knocking anyone dead. I was planning on letting Jessica do it to herself, tripping over her own inexperience and arrogance. The best revenge, my father used to say while dealing with difficult neighbors back in Illinois, isn't the one you meticulously plan, but the one the universe delivers when you simply step aside and watch. Friday morning, the Chicago sky was exceptionally blue, as if washed clean by the previous day's rain. At 9:47 a.m., I was sitting at a quiet cafe near Millennium Park, a cozy spot frequented by university professors and artists. The aroma of freshly roasted beans and baking pastries created a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted with the urban chaos outside. My phone started to ring. Jessica. The name flashed on the screen like a red alert. I let it go to voicemail, taking a sip of the pour-over coffee. Strong, no sugar, the way I learned to like it during late nights studying for biochemistry exams. Then she called again. And again. By 10:15, according to the Art Deco clock on the cafe wall, she had called 7 times. Each ignored call felt like a small act of liberation. At 10:23, it was Beatrice who called. I answered on the second ring. Robert, where are you? Her voice was tense, almost a whisper, as if she were speaking from a forbidden place. The Vitalis people are here, all of them. Dr. Campbell, Dr. Mendez, and Edward Vitalis himself. And Jessica is having a meltdown. I can't describe the scene. She can't find the technical specs they're asking for. They're in the system, I said calmly, stirring my coffee with a stainless steel spoon, watching the small dark whirlpool form and dissipate. She says they're not. She was up all night looking. Mark is here too, trying to smooth things over. I've never seen Dr. Campbell so angry. Tell her to check the project folder under the Vitalis Systems Technical Requirements subsection, I suggested, like giving directions to a place I knew didn't exist. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, only the sound of nervous breathing audible through the phone. I pictured her in some corner of the hallway, hiding to make this call, risking her own position. "Robert," she said finally, her voice even lower. "She says that folder is empty, except for basic contact info and some preliminary financial reports." I almost smiled, feeling a satisfaction that I immediately recognized as petty but genuine. That's because the technical specs were never digitized. They're in my notebook, the blue spiral-bound one that was in the second drawer of my desk. The one with the University of Michigan sticker on the cover. The one I took home yesterday. "The one you took home yesterday," Beatrice repeated, understanding slowly dawning in her voice. She was silent for a long moment, just the office buzz in the background. "They're asking specifically for you, Robert. Dr. Campbell said he was looking forward to discussing the temperature sensor. Calibration protocols you developed especially for their project. Dr. Mendez brought all the regulatory paperwork you asked to review. And Edward Vitalis is asking about the implementation timelines you two discussed at dinner last month." I looked out the cafe window, watching the city move. Hurried executives with their briefcases, students with heavy backpacks, street vendors arranging their wares, life moving on, indifferent to small corporate dramas. "I wish I could help," I said sincerely, because despite everything, those months of work on the Vitalis account meant something to me. It was a project that could make a real difference in American medical research. But I'm no longer an employee of Brancor, remember? At 10:45, it was Mark who called, the CEO himself, the founder's son. His name on the screen made me hesitate for a moment before answering. "Robert," his voice sounded tense, controlled, the kind of control that takes effort. "I need you to come in. There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Mark. I was fired yesterday, effective immediately. Your words, not mine. Or rather, the words of your new director of client relations." "Look, I think Jessica was hasty," he tried, his voice softening, shifting into the charm mode he used with investors. "Decisions were made in the heat of the moment. We can talk about this. Maybe she was. But the fact remains, I'm not an employee anymore. Mark, I can't legally represent Brancor in client meetings." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "What do you want, Robert?" "Name your price. We can bring you on as a consultant for this specific presentation." "I'm not available," I replied simply, which was true. I had a phone interview with Advanced Bio, Brancor's main competitor, at 2 p.m. The VP of Business Development, Paul Anderson, had called me personally after getting my resume that morning, surprised and delighted at the prospect of hiring me. By 11:30, according to texts from Beatrice, the Vitalis team had left the Brancor building. They gave Jessica exactly 20 minutes to produce the technical documentation they had specifically requested in prior emails. Emails addressed to me, not the company's generic inbox. When she failed to deliver, blaming systems reorganization and a transition period, they politely excused themselves and said they would be re-evaluating their options for strategic partnerships. Dare phrase that, in the American corporate world, meant the deal was dead. Jessica called again at noon. This time I answered, curious to hear what she had to say. "Robert," her voice was shaky, stripped of its usual confident veneer. "You have to help me. This is corporate sabotage. You deliberately withheld vital information. These are consequences, Jessica," I answered calmly, paying my bill and leaving a generous tip for the waitress who had kept my cup full all morning. "Consequences of decisions you made. I can report you for corporate sabotage, withholding company information." "That's a crime." Her voice went up an octave, desperation clearly taking over. "What information?" I asked as I stepped out into the warmth of the street. "I removed personal belongings from my office, as is my right. The notebooks were mine, purchased with my own money at the office supply store. All official company files remain intact on the server. It's not my fault if you don't know where to look or what to look for. You know that's not how it works in the real world, Robert. Actually, that is exactly how it works, Jessica." I was terminated without cause and without notice after 23 years of service. Brancor waived any right to my voluntary cooperation the moment you said we are restructuring your department and your position no longer exists, yesterday at 3:37 p.m. She hung up abruptly. 10 minutes later, corporate security called, asking me to return my company notebooks. I politely told them to check my employment contract. Section 12, paragraph 3. Personal notebooks, electronic devices and other items purchased with personal funds remain the exclusive property of the employee, regardless of any work-related content. A clause I had suggested myself years ago after a talented researcher left, taking only his intellect, but leaving behind valuable notes that ended up filed away and forgotten. At 1:30 p.m., while walking through Grant Park, watching old men play chess and children run between the century-old trees, Helen called, laughing so hard she could barely speak. Caroline just messaged me, she managed between laughs. She saw Jessica on LinkedIn posting about exciting new opportunities and accelerated digital transformation at Brancor. Apparently, she's trying to spin today's fiasco into a positive strategic restructuring. How's that working out for her? I asked, sitting on a weathered wooden bench watching an old couple feed pigeons, defying the signs that forbade it. 3 of your former clients have already commented on the post, asking where you went and if you're taking your projects to another company. The people from the USDA were particularly vocal. News travels fast in American biotech, I commented. Our industry was small. Everyone knew everyone. Personal relationships mattered more than contracts on letterhead. By 3 p.m., after a surprisingly cordial and promising phone interview with Paul Anderson from Advanced Bio, I had my answer to Jessica's earlier question about sabotage. Walking back to the parking garage where I'd left my truck, passing renovated historic buildings and modern design shops, reflecting on how Chicago was this unlikely mix of tradition and innovation, I realized what happened wasn't sabotage. Sabotage implied I had actively worked to damage something. I did nothing but take with me the knowledge that was in my head. Knowledge I had tried to share multiple times in recent months, only to have it dismissed as old-fashioned methods. The fact that Jessica hadn't bothered to learn how the department actually worked, that was her choice. The fact that she fired the only person who understood the complexities of her biggest accounts, that was her decision. The fact that she believed business relationships in the US could be reduced to PowerPoint slides and CRM reports, that was her limitation. I spent 15 years building something valuable, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, problem solved after problem solved. Jessica spent 15 minutes destroying it with an impulsive decision based on management theories that worked in Harvard case studies, but not in the complex reality of American business relationships. Now she was learning just how much that knowledge was really worth. My phone vibrated with another text from Beatrice. Vitalis just called. They want to know if you are available for freelance consulting. Apparently, they are very unhappy with Brancor's lack of preparation. They mentioned the project is urgent, and they need someone who understands the regulatory and technical complexities. They asked for your personal contact info. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, causing a small human traffic jam that earned me annoyed looks from hurried pedestrians. It was tempting. Accepting the consulting gig would be the final blow, the definitive proof that Jessica had made a colossal mistake. But something inside me, maybe the same impulse that made me leave that small town decades ago, told me it was time to look forward, not back. Tell them I sincerely appreciate the interest, but I'm not available for freelance projects at the moment, I replied. But they might want to consider Advanced Bio for their biotech needs. I hear they're expanding their biosensor division. Sometimes the best revenge is to simply get out of the way and let people face the consequences of their own actions. As my father used to say, watching neighbors who look down on him lose crops for not following his advice, life is the best teacher, Bobby, and it charges a steep price for its lessons. Saturday morning brought a clear sky and the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. I was organizing my small collection of vinyl records, a passion Helen tolerated with good humor, when I got a call from Thomas, my former colleague from the Shanghai team. "Robert, I need to tell you something," he said, his Midwestern accent more pronounced when he was nervous. "I probably should have told you weeks ago. I poured myself coffee in the mug that survived the office move and sat in the armchair on the balcony. The neighborhood's hum created a familiar urban soundtrack. Neighbors chatting, kids playing street hockey, a vendor announcing fresh produce. "I'm listening," I replied, letting the silence stretch comfortably. "Jessica has been calling our international clients," he began, hesitant. "Not to build relationships like she claimed in meetings, but to get specific information. She wanted to know about contract terms, renewal, dates, pricing structures, things she should have learned from internal files or by asking you directly." The picture became clearer, like the last pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "What else, Thomas?" She asked me to send her copies of all my correspondence with our Chinese clients. Said it was for quality assurance review and process auditing. When I told her that was already logged in the CRM system she implemented, she insisted she needed the originals, including personal notes and informal WeChat exchanges. I felt a cold knot in my stomach, like drinking ice water too fast. "Did you send them?" "No, Robert. I told her I'd need formal authorization from the legal department, considering Chinese privacy laws. She didn't push it after that, but I think she was building a case against you, trying to prove you were withholding information or mismanaging accounts, looking for retroactive justification for a decision she'd already made." That explained her sudden interest in my methods, the insistent questions about my client relationships, the requests for correspondence that wouldn't normally interest a marketing director. Jessica wasn't trying to learn from me or understand the business. She was trying to replace me with documentation she could control, to turn personal relationships into standardized processes, to convert 20 years of experience into a manual that any new graduate could follow. "There's more," Thomas continued, his voice firmer now. "Yesterday, after the Vitalis disaster, she called an emergency meeting. Got the whole client relations team in the main conference room, the big one with the view of the park. Told everyone you had deliberately withheld critical information to sabotage the company. That you were a disgruntled employee who was resisting necessary modernization." "And how did that go over?" I asked, though I could already guess. Beatrice shut it down. She stood up, you know her way, calm but firm, and pointed out that you had offered to train Jessica on all your accounts when she first arrived. She showed the emails you sent, offering knowledge transfer sessions. She reminded everyone of the onboarding folder you prepared specially for Jessica with detailed profiles of every major client. And Jessica? She said that was superficial and that you were hiding the really important detail. That's when Victor stepped in. Said he'd worked with you for 15 years and you were the most meticulous and transparent person he knew. That if some information wasn't documented, it was because the system she implemented couldn't handle the kind of qualitative knowledge that kept Brancor running. I remembered that conversation Victor mentioned. 3 months ago, I had spent an entire weekend preparing training materials for Jessica. I skipped a childhood friend's birthday party, postponed a promised outing with Caroline, and dedicated hours to creating detailed client profiles, mapping out communication preferences, and detailing specific technical requirements. Jessica had flipped through them for less than 10 minutes during a Monday morning meeting and said that traditional relationship management was too time-intensive for modern business practices, that we needed scalable systems, not knowledge concentrated in human silos. Words that sounded impressive in presentations to the board, but meant little in the real work of dealing with flesh and blood clients. "What's the mood in the office now?" I asked, watching a family walk down the street below, a father and mother holding hands with a small child between them, all eating ice cream despite the early hour. Small joys that executives like Jessica rarely noticed. "Tense? Mark has called an all-hands meeting for Monday." The email said, "Strategic restructuring of the client relations department." But everyone knows what that means. The rumor is he's bringing in external consultants from the same firm that recommended Jessica to assess the client relations crisis, as they're now calling it. After Thomas hung up, I stood on the balcony for a long time, watching the neighborhood, reflecting on the deeper implications of what he'd shared. Jessica hadn't just impulsively fired me because she thought she could do my job better for less. She had been deliberately planning to replace me for weeks, maybe months, collecting information, documenting processes, trying to extract decades of tacit knowledge into a format she could control. The Vitalis presentation was supposed to be her proof of concept, her ultimate demonstration that the old guard was disposable. A successful meeting would have validated her approach and justified my termination in the eyes of the board. It would have been the evidence that relationships can be codified, systemized, and transferred like digital files. Instead, the fiasco exposed just how little she understood about the very job she so confidently claimed she could optimize. Helen joined me on the balcony, bringing more coffee and slices of warm banana bread from the bakery. "You look thoughtful," she commented, sitting in the chair beside me. "Just processing some things," I replied, accepting the mug she offered. Jessica was trying to sabotage me for months, building a case against me while pretending she wanted to learn from me. Helen nodded, as if confirming something she already suspected. "Insecure people often try to destroy what they can't understand," she said simply. "It's easier to chop down a tree than to learn how to grow one." My phone rang again. Advanced Bio, Paul Anderson, the same executive from yesterday's interview. "Robert, Paul here. Sorry to call on a Saturday, but we've had a change of plans. We'd like to accelerate our hiring process and schedule an in-person interview for Monday if you're available. Our executive team was extremely impressed with your resume and our conversation yesterday. I'd be interested in hearing more about the position," I replied, watching a hummingbird visit the orchids Helen cultivated so lovingly on the balcony. "Excellent. Frankly, Robert, I'll be direct with you." Paul's tone shifted, becoming more confidential. "We've been watching the recent changes at Brancor with concern. Several of our partners and contacts in the industry have mentioned disruptions in their customer service. Abrupt personnel changes, new processes causing delays. As competitors, this could obviously be advantageous for us in the short term. But the American biotech market is too small for a major player to implode without affecting the whole ecosystem," I finished his thought. "Exactly. Besides, we are specifically looking for someone who understands the importance of relationship-based business development, someone who can navigate the complex American regulatory environment, and who understands that, in our country, trust is built in person, not through automated systems." After he hung up, with the interview set for Monday at 10 a.m., I realized that Jessica had ironically done me a favor. For years, I had been comfortable at Brancor. Good salary, familiar routines, established relationships. I was respected, valued by old Mr. Brandt, and had almost total autonomy in my department. But I had also stopped growing. I had become so focused on maintaining what I'd built that I forgot there were other places to build, other challenges to face, other teams to lead. Helen found me in the garage that afternoon, organizing tools I hadn't touched in months. Dusty boxes revealed unfinished projects, a bookshelf I promised to build, a stand for her plants, repairs for the wooden balcony table. "Productive day?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching me with that mix of affection and amusement that characterized our relationship. "An enlightening day," I replied, putting wrenches back in their proper places, organizing nails by size like I used to do with reports at the office. "I have an interview on Monday with Advanced Bio. They're offering a senior director position, a 20% salary increase, and stock options." "That's wonderful," she said, coming closer and examining the tools I'd just organized. "But you don't seem completely happy about it. What's bothering you?" I put the wrench I was holding back in the toolbox my father gave me when I moved to Chicago. A practical gift from a practical man. "I keep thinking about my team," I confessed. "Beatrice, who's just a few years from retirement and still taking care of her mother with Alzheimer's. Thomas, who finally managed to bring his family over from China after years of being apart. Victor, with 3 kids in college. They're good people stuck in the mess Jessica created. And the next round of consultants will probably make everything worse." Helen took my hand, hers small and stained with paint, mine large and calloused from years of handling lab equipment before moving into management. A contrast I always found fitting. Her creating beauty, me building structures. "You can't save everyone, Robert," she said softly but firmly. "As much as you want to, you can only control what you do next, and that's already a lot." She was right, as she usually was about matters of the heart. Jessica made her choices. Mark made his. Now they would both live with the consequences. My job wasn't to save a company that didn't value 2 decades of dedication. It was to make better choices for my own future, and perhaps Create a place where talented professionals could be valued for what they knew, not just for what they cost. Monday morning, the traffic on Lakeshore Drive was particularly heavy. I put on my best suit, the one I reserved for major presentations to international investors, and drove to the Advanced Bio headquarters in the West Loop, where mirrored skyscrapers house the country's top tech and biotech firms. The contrast with Brancor's more traditional headquarters was stark. More glass, more open spaces, more greenery. But what impressed me most was the laboratory visible from the main lobby. Scientists at work in a transparent environment, literally showing their work to anyone who walked in. A physical symbol of the philosophy Paul had mentioned on the phone. The interview was better than expected. Not just one, but 3 conversations with different company executives, including the founder, Dr. Robert Shimizu, a third-generation Japanese-American who had turned a small genetic research startup into a serious competitor in the biotech market in just 8 years. Around noon, I was called back to Paul's office, where a formal offer printed on letterhead was waiting for me. Senior Director of Client Relations, a 25% salary increase, full benefits, and a signing bonus that would cover Caroline's college tuition for the next 2 years. "We know you have other options, Robert," said Paul, a man in his late 40s with premature grey hair and lively eyes that seemed to constantly assess new possibilities, including staying home and working as an independent consultant. "But we believe you can help Advanced Bio grow the right way by building solid relationships with clients who share our vision." "When would you need me to start?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yesterday, if it were possible," Paul smiled. "But we'll be happy with next Monday." I accepted on the spot, signing the contract with the same Mont Blanc pen Edward Brandt had given me when I took over the client relations department at Brancor years ago. Our symbol of continuity amid change. Leaving the modern Advanced Bio building, feeling the midday sun on my face, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of the money, though it was welcome, especially with Caroline's university fees. It was because of the possibilities. Advanced Bio was growing fast, winning contracts with pharmaceutical giants and research universities across the US and Latin America. They needed someone who understood how to build lasting client relationships in a competitive market. Someone who could navigate the regulatory mazes of the FDA and understand the cultural nuances of doing business in the Americas. Someone exactly like me. My phone vibrated with a text from Beatrice. Brancor's stock dropped 3% this morning after an internal report was leaked to the trade press. The news about Vitalis is spreading. I've already seen 3 analysts questioning the company's new leadership and strategy. I wasn't surprised. In biotech, especially in the relatively small US community, reputation travels fast. Lose one major client due to poor preparation, and others start to question your reliability. Contracts are formalized on paper, but built on handshakes, long lunches, and promises kept. Jessica's modernization was looking more like incompetence with each passing day. Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal published a short piece about Vitalis Systems selecting Advanced Bio for its biosensor project. The $5 million contract I had spent 8 months working on at Brancor was now going to my new employer. The article didn't mention my name directly, but hinted that recent executive movements between the 2 companies had influenced the decision. Paul was ecstatic. On our first official day working together, he took me to lunch at a discreet Japanese restaurant near the office. "Couldn't ask for a better start," he said as we enjoyed impeccable sashimi. "The Vitalis contract not only gives us credibility in the biosensor sector, but opens doors for other similar projects. Dr. Shimizu is especially pleased. He's been trying to break into that market for years." Wednesday, Thomas called with an update from Brancor. "Mark fired Jessica yesterday, effective immediately," he said, unable to hide a note of satisfaction in his voice. Called her into his office right after the all-hands meeting, and 15 minutes later, security was escorting her out of the building, carrying a box of her belongings. They say he was furious about the leaked internal report and the loss of the Vitalis contract. "How's the team handling it?" I asked, genuinely concerned for the colleagues I'd left behind. "Relief mostly, but there are worrying rumors. It seems Mark is talking to the same consulting firm that recommended Jessica about bringing in another digital transformation specialist to assess the department's efficiency. He hasn't learned his lesson, apparently. I felt a pang of sympathy for my former colleagues. They had survived Jessica's brief and turbulent reign, but corporate restructuring was like a virus. Once it started, it was hard to stop, especially when led by executives who confused change with progress. Thomas, can I ask you something personal? Of course, Robert. What is it? Are you happy at Brancore? Truly satisfied with your work and the direction things are heading? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that carries more meaning than many words. Not really, he finally admitted. Ever since old Mr. Brandt left, everything's changed. Numbers matter more than people. Processes more than results. I just spent 6 months learning Mandarin to improve our communication with Chinese partners, and no one besides you seemed to notice or care. But why? Advanced Bio is expanding its international operations, I explained. They're specifically looking for business development specialists for Asian markets. Someone with your experience and language skills would be extraordinarily valuable, especially someone who understands that business relationships with the Chinese are built on patience and respect, not aggressive contracts. Are you serious? His voice went up an octave, the excitement palpable even through the phone. Completely. I officially start next Monday. If you're interested, I can set up a conversation with the Director of International Operations. No strings attached, just to explore possibilities. Thursday, while finalizing the details of my departure from Brancore with the legal department, issues of accrued benefits, profit sharing and confidentiality. I received a call from Paul Anderson with an unexpected proposal. Robert, we had a strategic planning meeting yesterday with the board of directors, he began without preamble. We're thinking of expanding our pharmaceutical consulting division. It's currently a small department, just 3 people, but we see enormous potential, especially with the new FDA regulations for biosimilars and export opportunities to Canada and Mexico. Sounds like a significant expansion. It is, and that's precisely why we're talking now. We'd need someone to lead this expansion, someone with deep industry knowledge, regulatory expertise, and crucially, established relationships. Dr. Shimizu suggested you might know potential candidates. I immediately thought of Beatrice. With her 27 years of experience in pharmaceutical regulatory compliance, I remembered the countless times she had successfully navigated the FDA processes when everyone else thought it was impossible. I thought of her frustrated ambition. Jessica had passed her over for promotion 3 times, claiming she was too traditional in her approach. And I thought of her personal situation, caring for her elderly mother, needing stability but also recognition. I might know someone perfect for the position, I answered cautiously, but I need to check if she would be open to new opportunities. Friday afternoon, after a week of transitioning between jobs, I drove to the cafe near Millennium Park, the same place where I had watched the beginning of Jessica's downfall a week earlier. This time I was meeting Beatrice, who had requested an afternoon off for personal matters. She arrived promptly at 4 p.m., as was her custom, wearing the same navy blue blazer she wore to all important meetings, her professional armor, as she used to joke. Robert, she said after we settled at a discreet table in the back of the cafe, I can't believe what you're offering. When you called, I thought it was just for coffee between old colleagues. Believe it be, I replied, using the nickname only her closest friends used. Advanced Bio wants to build a serious pharmaceutical consulting division, not just to meet regulations, but to truly guide clients through the increasingly complex American regulatory environment. You would be the founding director. Complete autonomy to build a team, develop methodology, establish processes, a competitive salary, at least 30% more than what you're currently making, and the chance to build something significant from scratch. And Thomas, you mentioned you spoke with him too. He's already accepted. He starts on Monday, same day as me, as the manager of international business development for Asian markets. Advanced Bio is especially interested in his experience with patent registration in China. Beatrice stared at her coffee cup for a long moment, the steam rising in hypnotic spirals between us. The wrinkles around her eyes seemed more pronounced under the soft light of the cafe, each one telling stories of late-night reports, impossible deadlines, and solved problems. Mark offered me your old position yesterday, she finally said. "Department head for client relations. Said they needed someone who understood the business, who valued the company's tradition." "And you were planning to accept?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I was," she admitted, "until now. It seemed like the natural progression, finally the recognition I'd waited years for, but it would just be putting out fires, right? Rebuilding what was destroyed, not creating something new." "Exactly," she nodded, adjusting her glasses in a familiar gesture. "Brancor will be fine eventually. They'll hire someone new, rebuild relationships, regain client trust. But it will take years, and they'll probably go through a few more Jessicas in the process." "And Advanced Bio?" "Advanced Bio is moving forward with or without us," she completed my thought, showing why we had worked so well together for so many years. "The question is whether we want to be part of building something new or spend our energy fixing something that others broke." She smiled for the first time since she entered the cafe, that rare smile that lit up her entire face and made the years momentarily disappear. The same smile I saw when we got our first international certification after months of exhaustive work. "When do I start?" By the end of the week, Advanced Bio had hired 3 former Brancor employees, me, Beatrice, and Thomas. Not through aggressive corporate poaching or predatory recruiting, but through opportunity. The opportunity that arises when talented professionals are suddenly freed to consider new paths. We weren't running from something, we were running towards something better, something we would build with the values we always believed in: technical excellence, genuine client relationships, and the understanding that in America, business is done between people, not between companies. Jessica, unintentionally, had taught us all a valuable lesson about the difference between managing people as resources and leading people as human beings with unique knowledge, experience, and potential. Now we had the chance to put that lesson into practice, building something that reflected our values, not just our desire for efficiency. 3 months later, I was sitting in a conference room at Advanced Bio's newly expanded offices, reviewing quarterly results with Paul Anderson, Beatrice, and the executive team. The room overlooked the Chicago River, and beyond it the city skyline, a city that, like us, was constantly reinventing itself without losing its essence. The numbers projected on the screen were impressive, even by the optimistic standards we had set. Beatrice's pharmaceutical consulting division, 200% growth in just 3 months, already with a team of 7 specialists serving clients across the country. International contracts led by Thomas, a 150% increase, with new partnerships in China, Singapore, and South Korea. Client satisfaction scores at an all-time high across all departments. "Robert, your team has exceeded every projection we made when we decided to expand these areas," said Paul, clearly impressed by the upward trending graphs. "The Vitalis implementation alone has generated 5 new inquiries for similar contracts. Clients who want the same personalized approach and attention to technical detail." Beatrice, now the director of pharmaceutical consulting with her own office and assistant, smiled from across the glass table. The regulatory approval process for the Vitalis biosensor went smoother than anyone expected, including Vitalis themselves. "We got approval in half the normal time." When clients see that kind of efficiency, especially with the FDA, word spreads quickly. Thomas joined via video conference from Shanghai, where he was closing a deal with a major research hospital. The time difference meant it was night for him, but his enthusiasm was evident even through the digital connection. "International expansion is ahead of schedule," he reported, with the illuminated Pudong skyline as his backdrop. "We're looking at 3 new markets next quarter: Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And the news of our relationship-building approach is creating positive expectations." That afternoon, after the successful meeting, I received an unexpected email. Mark Brandt wanted to meet for coffee. He suggested the cafe near Millennium Park next Saturday. "Neutral ground, nobody's territory," I replied, accepting the invitation, curious to hear what he had to say. We met at 10 a.m., with the cafe already bustling with its weekend crowd. Students with laptops, couples enjoying a late brunch, retired gentlemen quietly discussing politics. Mark looked older, more tired than I remembered, though only 3 months had passed. Deep circles under his eyes, more grey in his hair, a less upright posture. the costs of unwise leadership stamped on his face. "Robert, I owe you an apology," he said after the waiter brought our coffees. "No, actually, I owe you much more than that. I made a mistake with Jessica, a catastrophic error in judgment." I nodded slightly, neither confirming nor denying, allowing him to continue. "How is Brancor doing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from industry contacts and market reports. "Surviving," he sighed, stirring his coffee with slow, hypnotic circular motions. "We lost 4 major clients after the Vitalis situation. We had to lay off 15 people from the production department because the projects they supported were cancelled. The stock price still hasn't recovered. We're almost 8% below where we were before you left." He looked out the window, watching the street for a moment. "But that's not even the worst of it. Jessica cost us more than clients and market value. She cost us institutional knowledge, relationships that took years to build. Trust that you can't get back with an apology or a discount. You can rebuild," I offered, without cruelty or satisfaction in his difficulty. "Maybe," he agreed, "but it won't be the same. Not with the same clients, the same people, the same market position. Lost opportunities rarely come back." He looked up, his eyes finally meeting mine directly. "I've heard about your success at Advanced Bio, the pharmaceutical division Beatrice is leading. Thomas's international expansion, the Vitalis contract and the ones that came after. All of that should have been Brancor's growth." I said nothing. There wasn't much to say. No reply that wouldn't sound like a needless "I told you so" or false sympathy. Mark took my silence as an invitation to continue. "Would you consider coming back?" he asked abruptly. "I could offer you the position Jessica briefly held. Vice President of Operations. Full authority over client relations, business development, everything. A blank check to rebuild your team as you see fit." "I'm happy where I am, Mark," I replied simply. "Double your current salary," he offered, desperation starting to creep into his voice. "And a seat on the board. Equity. It's not about the money." He leaned back in his chair, studying me as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. "Then what is it about, Robert? Revenge, proving us wrong? Because if it is, you've made your point completely." "It's about trust," I answered after a moment of reflection. "When you hired Jessica and supported her approach, you made a choice. You chose to believe that relationships don't matter as much as processes. That experience can be replaced by efficiency. That knowledge built over decades is worth less than trendy management theories. That was your choice as a leader." "I was wrong," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him a physical effort. "Yes, you were," I agreed, "but the damage is done. Not just to Brancor as a company, but to the trust that existed. Your clients no longer trust Brancor in the same way. Your employees don't trust the leadership. And frankly, Mark, I don't trust that you won't make the same mistake again the next time a consultant with an impressive PowerPoint promises magical results." Mark left without finishing his coffee, leaving a $100 bill on the table, far more than needed for 2 coffees. A final gesture from someone who still believed that financial resources could solve fundamentally human problems. As I watched him walk away down the busy sidewalk, shoulders slumped under the weight of his decisions, I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction at his hardship, nor joy at being in a better place. I felt pity, genuine pity for a man who had inherited a company built by his father on genuine relationships, and was losing it because he failed to understand the true foundations of that success. He had learned an expensive lesson about the value of experience, institutional knowledge, and loyalty. And like many expensive lessons, this one came too late to be truly useful. 6 months after my termination from Brancor, Advanced Bio announced a major strategic acquisition, the pharmaceutical consulting assets and intellectual property of 3 smaller biotech firms, creating the largest independent consulting practice in the country. Dr. Shimizu appointed me Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, responsible for integrating these acquisitions and developing our growth plan for the next 5 years. The announcement was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. The article, written by a veteran journalist who had covered the biotech sector for decades, specifically mentioned my previous role at Brancor, noting how my departure had preceded a period of turbulence and strategic realignment at the company, a polite euphemism for the chaos that followed. Jessica, according to recent updates on her LinkedIn profile, had taken a position as a digital transformation specialist at a tech startup in Austin. Her profile emphasized her experience in organizational transformation and change management in traditional corporate environments. There was no specific mention of Brandcore in her recent experience, nor any reference to what that transformation had actually accomplished. The poetic justice of the situation was not lost on those of us who had lived through those turbulent months. By trying to prove that relationships don't matter as much as processes, she had inadvertently destroyed the relationships that had kept Brandcore competitive for 2 decades. By trying to show that experience is easily replaced by modern methodologies, she had eliminated the very experience that made those methodologies effective when applied correctly. Beatrice and Thomas thrived in their new roles at Advanced Bio. The team we built together was everything Jessica claimed modern. Business should be efficient, results-oriented, technologically integrated, and highly profitable. The crucial difference was that we built this efficiency on a solid foundation of mutual respect and shared knowledge, not on corporate buzzwords and arbitrary restructurings based on theories without local context. Last week, Caroline called from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business with news that made this entire journey even more meaningful. "Dad, you're not going to believe this," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "My business strategy professor used your story as a case study today about the importance of institutional knowledge and relationship management in complex markets like the American one. She called it the Brandcore mistake and used it to illustrate how companies can destroy value by underestimating human and relational capital." "And what did you tell her?" I asked, curious how my daughter had navigated this unusual situation. I told her my dad always said that the best revenge is living well, and that some business lessons can't be learned from PowerPoints, only through practice. Helen was right, as she usually was, about life's fundamental questions. You can't save everyone from the consequences of their decisions. You can only control what you do next, the opportunities you embrace, the values you uphold, the relationships you cultivate. 6 months later, Brandcore's board of directors, pressured by dissatisfied investors, forced Mark to step down as CEO after a series of failed client acquisitions and consecutive quarterly financial losses. The company his father had built over decades was now for sale, with foreign multinationals circling like sharks, ready to break it into parts more valuable separately than as a whole. Jessica's startup in Austin shut down just 8 months after its founding, unable to secure a second round of funding after its initial product failed to gain market traction. She was now explaining this gap on her resume to increasingly skeptical employers, in a market that valued concrete results over grandiose promises. The organizational transformation she had so enthusiastically championed had become a case study, taught in business schools across the country, not as an example of success, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating human and relational capital in trust-based business cultures like America's. Sometimes, I reflect, life's most satisfying victories are the ones where you never have to throw a punch, raise your voice, or even point out the other person's mistake. They are the ones where you simply go on your way with dignity, building something meaningful while letting the lessons reveal themselves naturally to those who are ready to learn them. As my father used to say while tending his small farm back in Illinois, "Time is the best teacher, Bobby, and also the most impartial."